almost certain that we'll have at least 6 feet higher seas in the before the end of the century. And there's a possibility of 10 to 12 feet of high water higher than there is now. This really does call into question the safety of the dry cask storages. Also, it's my understanding that the dry casks start to degrade after 30 years or sooner. So what is to be done about that? Where is any guarantee that even before the end of this century we won't be dealing with irredeemable leakage? This is something that we need this panel to be very concerned with. So I could say a lot more, but I think most people have said everything that I was concerned about. And I just wish you courage and fortitude in your jobs, and please make it possible for the public to interact with you, because nothing could be more important. It really is. It's one of the keys to the success of the decommissioning. If you do not consider the public concerns fully, then you will have failed in your advisory capacity. I had one other point in it, so escaped me. It'll come to me next meeting. I can't do it.
Langman?
I'll pass. Thank you.
Shirley Lynch? Shirley is a nice name, but when in Sheila Lynch comes to me, that's all right. Duxbury. I'm a private resident. I'm just here for the information, but I'm alarmed by Mr. Lynch's not a relative presentation about safe store versus decon. Decon, as I understand, is a 60-year process where, no, safe store is immediate. Oh, I'm sorry. Safe store is a 60-year process. Decon puts it off till later. Decontaminate right away. He mentioned that Vermont needed $1.24 billion, and that Plymouth current fund is $1 billion. So clearly we're underfunded to start with. And my concern is that Entergy will then put off decontaminating the plant because of lack of funding. And he mentioned in his presentation that funding would prohibit any closure from going forward unless there was adequate funding. So there's an issue about the amount of funds available and the 2-year process left with closure.
No, if I can, I'd like to try to clarify a couple of things. There are 2 decommissioning methods, decon and safe store. Decon is referred to as prompt decommissioning. It doesn't mean immediate decommissioning, because you need to have some time for the spent fuel to cool after the plant is shut down. But it would be relatively soon after the shutdown if you opted for that method, maybe 3 to 5 years or so after a shutdown. That's the earliest you could do it. Safe store is simply deferred decommissioning, and it doesn't have to be for 60 years. What the NRC requires is that the licensee complete decommissioning the plant within 60 years. But the safe store period could be 5 years, it could be 15 years.
And the safe store is dry cask, decon.
No, safe store simply means, if you think about it this way, it's really decon and safe store are versions of the same thing. Decon just means that you're decommissioning the site. Safe store means you're deferring that major work for some period of time. Could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could
Due
be
to
20.
funding?
Well, it can be new funding, but you are just deferring the work, and it doesn't have to be up to 6 years. The selection of which method, whether it's decon or safe store, has no impact whatsoever on the shutdown date for the facility. The facility will shut down
But it,
on or about June 1st, 2019, regardless of the trust fund balance or anything else.
I understand the site will shut down no matter what by May 31st, 2019. But whether it's properly safely stored, currently we have $1 billion for decommissioning, but Vermont needed $1.24 billion, and yet Plymouth might be larger. But, so we don't have enough money.
What you said was that there were inadequate funds for it to be properly and safely stored, and I don't agree with that.
It's a matter.
Well, the fact is that we will either start decommissioning approximately 5 years after shutdown, when the fuel is cool and out of spent fuel, or it will be decommissioned at some point thereafter. Could be 5 years later than that, it could be 10 years later, it could be 15 years later. But the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requires that it be complete within 60 years, unless you file for and obtain some kind of an extension.
So, to my point, he mentioned the decision whether it's decon or safe store will be a cost-benefit analysis, which will be an economic analysis of which way to go. And I would like to add to the cost-benefit analysis of Pilgrim is that it's different than the other decommissioned sites in upstate New York, Vermont, Yankee Grove, in that it's in an international flight zone from Logan Airport in terms of its cost-benefit, terrorism issues, etc. It's totally different than the other sites in New England. And also the population in the area was mentioned earlier, but also the cultural heritage. Chernobyl has an 18-kilometer zone, 30-mile zone around it that cannot be entered by humans for 20,000 years is the current estimate when people can return back to the Chernobyl area. So in the cost-benefit analysis of how to decommission Pilgrim, I'd like the Commission to consider the 18 miles around Pilgrim Nuclear Power Plant being out of commission for 20,000 years for humans if there's an accident. I think it's significant that this plant is in a major flight path, that it is currently has an open pool with open storage, and that the current standard of dry cask is 4 feet above sea level, 150 feet in from Cape Cod Bay, and people are talking about endangered whales and all the rest. I really think it's important. The 30-mile zone of people in this area and the amount of population, the cultural resources in this area, and that this commission really consider Pilgrim as special above rural nuclear power plants that have been decommissioned. This is extremely important that you really consider the flight path and the cost-benefit analysis of an accident in this zone. Thank you.
We still have one more person that is on the list, so I'd like to, if they could keep their comments very brief so that we can wrap up and be done by 8 o'clock. Bruce Howell.
Well, of course, you made a mistake in asking my comments to be brief because I'm an attorney.
If you could, we do need to wrap up. you are. There's a handheld mic there, if you could use that, that would be helpful.
First of all, congratulations on your appointment to this committee and on the awesome responsibilities that you have been given. I'd like to contextualize your work for you, if I may, from my perspective, as an attorney with interest in state and federal regulations of energy and energy-producing facilities. I remind you that, for example, the statute that creates this body exists within an act to promote energy diversity. So it's being seen in the context of energy as a whole. And then your powers are dramatically limited. Are dramatically limited.
I misspoke, we do have another speaker, so that
You're in an advisory capacity only. That's number one. You're to commence public meetings. You're to hold a minimum of 4 public meetings, although empowered to do more. So I would request, at least initially, that absolutely every meeting be publicized, be open, be recorded. I trust that that will happen. To advise on issues, serve as a conduit for public information related to the decommissioning funds and to receive reports, relative to Ms. Lambert's comment about the reports being seen. I hope that everybody on the panel and everybody in the Commonwealth will be educated in this process. We are decommissioning what nobody can deny is a potentially dangerous, tragically dangerous facility with very special concerns relative to the long life of nuclear waste and the proximity to the ocean. So, with those comments, I leave you to your good work. Thank you.
Thank you. I do want to give Ken Tavares, I apologize. If you're here, I almost overlooked you. Thank you. Do your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. On behalf of the Board of Selectmen from Plymouth, we appreciate all of you serving on this panel. When we made our appointments, we looked for diversity, and when our council was sought on other appointments, we asked for the same thing. So we are certainly looking for good things, to come from you. We also want to say to you, ask the tough questions and seek the truthful answers. I have learned, and I think my colleagues on the board would agree, that this is a very complex process. And over the years, and going back to the beginning of this plan, we always felt somewhat that we weren't in touch, that the decisions are made on much higher levels. Well, that happened all during the life of a plan. And now we're looking to decommission, and we're still in that same position. Your work is going to set the table for what happens on the federal level. And again, I repeat, you have to ask the tough questions. There's an economic component to this, and there's a safety component to it. We are depending on you. We have to have the engagement of the Commonwealth if we're going to get the federal government to change some of its ways. I thank you for being here. I'm sure you're going to have more than 4 meetings, and I wish you well, and you have the full support of the town of Plymouth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, here, look at next steps. We will, as our lawyer friend discussed, we will be posting these meetings pursuant to Chapter 188 of the Acts of 216. So we will, I'm not sure if I quoted that right statute, but we will help we will be publishing the next meeting. I think what we did hear loud and clear, the necessity, and I know Mr. Lynch mentioned it, of a website, because the goal, obviously, a primary goal of this group is to make sure that the public has access and transparency to all the information. Well, we need to establish a website.
I would really like to see EEA sponsor the website.
can talk about that. We can talk about that. But there will be a website. I know Mr. Lynch doing what they did in Vermont, that they hosted that website. But we can look at what the options are for hosting a website, and we will publish the date of the next meeting. And if there are other questions or general business of this commission right now, it's to be addressed to Matthew Campbell. He's his email address is on the agenda that was in the front when people signed in. So, are there other questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make the first motion of that. It's clear.
Can you use the mic? You can't do it.
Sean Mullin, I'd like to make the first motion of the evening, and that motion is that we decide right now to hold more than quarterly meetings. There clearly is need among the board to go back and take a look at the legislation, whether it's about the website, where it's clearly delineated and specified in the legislation that the Executive Office of Environmental Affairs shall provide the administrative support to this. Tonight, it also said in the legislation that one of the first administrative duties was to select by the board, not by the legislature, but by the board, the chair or co-chairs of the committee. We have a lot of administrative organizational things to do as a group to figure out exactly how we're going to try to provide the best advice, how to get the best input over the next months and years to come. So I'd like to make a motion right now that approximately a month, 5 weeks, whatever is convenient to be arranged, that the next meeting of the board for the panel is conducted at a location in Plymouth again, because I think it's more convenient for most of the stakeholders and most of the people involved. And that meeting, the agenda be developed by input from each of the panel members, and these things we've heard from the community tonight. And that agenda first focuses on allowing us an opportunity to get this thing organized with subcommittees and groups, and really delineating what we need to begin looking at. So that's my motion. I'm looking for a second.
Patrick O'Connell, the Oklahoma Planning Council, would be happy to second that.
Well, I really think we need to table that for this meeting, as I said on the outset. We can discuss that, and I'm happy to discuss that with panel members, but I want to table that decision for this meeting, as I mentioned when we opened it up, for now.
Why? Isn't this a
We are committed to 4 meetings by the legislation. I'm not saying we're not doing 4 meetings. I'm talking about administrative support and who hosts the website and that information. We are committed to 4 meetings by the legislation, and I believe I can speak for the commission to say that we will have 4 meetings.
Just real quickly, closing, given that I was one of the legislators while I was in that actually sponsored and wrote the legislation, I want to be real clear about something. The concern I have, and just as background, I also served as the accountable executive for an airline that flies 140,000 flights a year. And just for the purposes of sort of display, I have with me our 170-page safety management system program. And one of the reasons that we did this, being mindful of preemption and what jurisdiction we have as a state, as a commonwealth, is my extreme discomfort relative to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and its ability. And this is not a slight, it sounds like it's a slight on industry, it isn't. I'm a CEO, I'm an executive of a corporation that depends on safety for our survival. But I also have a very good respect and understanding of the role of government in making sure that safety is adhered to. The safety systems that the airline industry has in place, relative to feedback loops, relative to oversight, relative to internal audits, is, by comparison, it doesn't even compare with what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the NRC do relative to this industry. And I think it is paramount, and it's one of the reasons that we filed the legislation, that we understand first and foremost that through the decommissioning process, and there have only been a handful of these plants decommissioned, so we don't have a lot of prior cases to learn from, that we make sure there are safety systems in place that will guarantee that that is put in front of any economic or financial considerations, and that there be adequate public input, and from the Commonwealth, the ability to input to the NRC. They don't have to listen to us. I understand preemption. The state has no more ability to weigh in at an airline than we do at a power plant that's a nuclear power plant. I get all that. But you're hearing from an expert right now, not a legislative expert. I only did that 6 years. I've been flying airplanes for 40 years and running an airline for 28. And I am concerned about the lack of safety system management as it relates to the decommissioning process. Specifically to the decommissioning. So I'm going to talk about the operating of the power plant now. I'm talking specifically about systems that need to be in place to make sure that as this plant is taken apart and we transfer fuel and ultimately, hopefully, export the fuel, that it's done in a safe manner. And I have seen nothing that gives my mind ease and peace relative to those systems being in place. This is not intent, this is system management. And I really think this group needs to focus on that. Thank you.
Could I make a motion? I would like to simplify Mr. Mullins' motion and just ask this board to set the next date for our meeting 1 month, 4 weeks from tonight at June 21st.
There's certain citing requirements that we have to notify the Secretary of State. It has to go through a whole process. So we can't pick a date tonight. We are committed, everybody up here is committed to the 4 meetings. So we will be scheduling another meeting. I can't give you a date right now because there's a whole process that we have to go through before we can set that date.
Let me just point out, Madam Chairman, are you ruling a motion to hold the meeting as soon as possible out of order? Is that what you're saying?
There's a process in setting these meetings. I can't sit here tonight and pick a date without understanding all of the aspects that we had to go through to set this meeting, with public postings and notification through the Secretary of State's office.
How about vote on the motion?
I'd like to make a suggestion, Sean, if I can, on your attempt here, that we ask the chair to set a meeting as early as 1 month from tonight, as soon as she can, as soon as she can. That's all. If you can promise us that you'll do it as soon as bureaucratically possible.
I would certainly accept that amendment.
Again, I'm not an expert in how we have to post these public meetings. I chair an agency and was put in this spot by the legislature, thank you. But I don't know exactly the soonest date that we can do that, but we will look at that date and send out that notice as soon as practicable.
One last point, Madam Chairman. Since you read what the advisory board's role shall be under Section 14, I'd like to point out that under Section D, the panel annually shall elect a chair, co-chairs, and a vice chair for a 1-year term commencing with its first meeting, following the effective
And I
date.
suggested that we would table that election until the next meeting, which is my right, I believe, as chair to do. I motion to adjourn.